All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Reading League Florida's monthly webinar. My name is Jesse Stife and I'm the president of the chapter. Just a few short words before we get into Dr. Burns' excellent content tonight. I want to encourage everyone to keep up with us by either visiting us at fl.thereadingleague.org or following us on Facebook at the Reading League Florida. We're always disseminating high quality resources over there that are directly applicable for teachers. And while you're on our page, I'll encourage everyone to consider joining us as members. Your membership helps us keep the lights on and keep the high quality professional development coming. We are an all volunteer 501c3 organization. And so this is only a labor of love that we all do for free in our spare time. And every penny from membership goes right back into the organization for things like hosting and insurance and so on. Social media is also the primary way that we communicate about our upcoming webinars. So information about the November event will be out shortly. For tonight's webinar, we've opened up the Q&A function and welcome our live participants to ask questions during the presentation. Dr. Burns will be taking some questions at the end of it. And please remember to use the Q&A only to ask questions and not to make comments since it makes it a bit more difficult for us to work through all of those entries. All right, and lastly, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Matt Burns. Dr. Burns is a professor of special education and director of the Center for Collaborative Solutions for Kids, Practice and Policy at the University of Missouri. He is a prolific researcher, having published over 200 articles and book chapters and 12 books. But he's also dedicated to translating that research directly into best practice in K-12 schools. As one of the leading researchers regarding the use of assessment data to determine instructional needs, Dr. Burns works closely with schools to study and implement response intervention models, intensive reading and math interventions, and a variety of other impactful topics. In his dedication to speaking directly to practitioners, he's also really active on social media and regularly does webinars like these. One of our favorites is a recent webinar he did for the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN, on class-wide intervention, which you can find on PATN's YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. And here's Dr. Burns.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Jesse. I really appreciate this opportunity. Yeah, I've been doing research for 20 plus years, and it wasn't until recently when things like the Reading League and social media, and all of a sudden now research became, there's a venue at least to make it more available to practitioners, and the interest by the Reading League and others in the science of reading has really fostered this excitement, which is great. So a chance to come talk with people, recognizing it's a give me one way almost because of the venue, but that's okay. This is just too great of an opportunity to turn down. And tonight we want to talk about leveling kids. When I say leveling, I mean informal reading inventories. I'm gonna focus tonight on the Fontes and Pinnell, but the DRA, the Jerry John's Basic Reading Inventory, all of these have existed for a long time. So tonight I want to talk about why we do that, why we shouldn't, and what we should do instead. I'll start with the conversation of why we do it, and that's pretty straightforward. It's called the instructional level. Way back in 1946, Betts made this observation. It was literally an anecdotal observation. It was, kids can read better. They can read about 95% of the words correctly. And he called that the instructional level. And it started an industry. Now, there's very few people who've actually done research on the instructional level. Ed Gickling has, I'll show you some of his research in a second, but he's talking about the instructional level it's that point where there's still new information, the kid's still learning, but there's enough background knowledge they can do the task. And Vygotsky calls it basically zone of proximal development. Obviously there's more than that, but that's the same idea. So in 1946, when he made this famous observation, like I said, started this whole industry. So here's why it matters. Please follow along as I read this to you. Long radians were formed when Matthew arrived. He tried to fin date the amount of time it would take to get to the corn forester. If it'd be too long, last he would miss the game. He vraxated for a moment until the radians became even longer. he decided he would join the radian opus vort, it would start moving more expeditiously. No sooner had he started flegel when it began opit mostly quite hard. Matthew became disgusted, zipped up his ornithorger, and walked back to his car. He drove home old the mostjo. By the time he put the car in the garage, the mostjo was joined and the Fadius was out. Matthew was doubly disgusted now. Sullenly, he went inside to watch the game. He turned on the television set, but nothing happened, and Matthew said to himself, "What a lousy frole." Now, some of you are really focusing and thinking, okay, what's this about? I can figure this out. This is like a game to you. Some of you, after the second sentence, stopped caring what it was about. This is based on my all-time favorite study by Ed Gickley. I've replicated this fairly recently, and I'll share those data too. Oops. But here, Ed just observed some fourth grade kids who identified with a learning disability in reading. And he observed them as they were engaged in reading instruction. And we saw was that they understood about what, 75% of the material? I'm sorry, clearly about 75% of the material. They understood about 25% of the material, and they were on task about 50% of the time, which, if you've ever worked with kids with learning disabilities, that's not atypical, right? Then they decided to modify the task difficulty to come back to that concept Betts initially coined. So they set up a material in which the kids could read about 85% of the words. And here we see comprehension stay about the same, completion stay about the same. Task completion went down somewhat, but nothing really interesting to see there. But then they used material in which the kids could read 93 to 97% of the words. So they took grade appropriate topics and just manipulated it so the kids could actually read the words, 93 to 97% of those words. And look what happened. Task completion went up. Comprehension went up. Of course, comprehension went up. You can't comprehend it if you can't read it. Most of the comprehension problems in school are actually fluency problems. I've done 2 studies, and I'm sorry I didn't have a citation for this. I just found a 3rd study, maybe 10 years after I had done those first 2 that replicated the design and found the exact same thing. That in elementary school, unless a kid can read about 60% of the words, most of the time they're going to struggle to have comprehension. So most of the time, a teacher comes to me and says, this kid's really struggling with comprehension. First thing I'm gonna do is measure their fluency. 9 times out of 10, they're not understanding the words because they're not reading the words. Fix that fluency problem first, and their comprehension problem goes away, usually. Now, these kids all of a sudden could read 93 to 97% of the words, and their time on task, their comprehension went way up. But look at time on task. That's way up over 90%. Then they did something brilliant. They used material that kids could read 100% of the words, still age-appropriate topics, etc., but the kids could read the words. Now, with 100%, task comprehension stayed high, task completion stayed high, but look at time on task. Back down where it started. Here, they were frustrated. And probably here, they were bored. So what Ed tried to do was really come down and identify what's that zone, what's that magic window? And he called it motivation. I wouldn't use that term, but that's okay. He said, if a child can read 93 to 97% of the words, that's what represents an instructional level. And that's when you see time on task, task completion, and task comprehension go way up. If they can't read 93% of the words, it's too hard. They won't comprehend it, they won't complete it, and they'll likely have time off task. If it's too easy, you'll still have comprehension and completion, but you'll have a lot more time off task. Whenever a teacher calls me and asks me to come work with a kid, one of the first things I do is look at, and one of the kids struggling with time on task, one of the first things I look at is, can they read what we're asking them to read? Most of the time they can't. So then again, so we know that this roughly 93 to 97% of the words being read correctly represents this instructional level. So after Betts made this observation of this 95%, there was an industry was born of the informal reading inventory. IRIs, they try and give the kid a series of graded passages to find the highest reading level at which the kid could accurately read the words and comprehend. Really, everyone knows this, very commonly used in schools, right? Everything from, as I just mentioned, Jerry Johns, basic reading inventory, DRA, Burns and Rowe, which is not me, by the way, STEP, and recently the 5% Fennell. So FMP came out, I think 2009 was its first version. I'm not sure about that, honestly, but I looked at the 2012 version. So when the Fontes and Pinnell came out, I was intrigued because I do research instructional level. And so whenever something comes out that measures the instructional level, I usually take a look at it. So I did. And as I'm reading it, and it says it measures accuracy, oral reading fluency, reading comprehension. There's K2, 3.8. It said right in there, like on page 4 or something, it says that the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. So I'm talking about the benchmark assessment system. It can be used to determine instructional level, and you get a grade, a letter designation. So instead of getting like a 2.8 or 28, you get an L or an M or something like that. And it said it can be used to screen reading skills. So that got me kind of interested. Used to adjust reading skills. So used to screen for reading skills. So I looked further in there and found nothing no data that showed you could use it to screen reading skills. No data to support the validity of that claim. Now, there was some data in there. It claims to have a test-retest reliability. Trying to get my screen out of the way here. There you go. There, try that. It claims to have, there we go. There, it has test-retest reliability, 0.97, really good reliability coefficients. It said that has good convergent validity with reading recovery tests, with texts from reading recovery, with those tests, 0.94. Correlated with other standard reading as measured, 0.44, 0.69. Basically, good reliability, good concurrent validity, but no information on the reported uses of the data. So they said they can use it to screen. All right, so we started a series of studies. We did 3, all of them are published. We're replicating 2 of them right now, but all of them are published around 2015, 2016. It's about 5 years ago. We want to look at diagnostic accuracy for identifying struggling readers. Can you screen? And we want to look at, can you use it for instruction and can you use it for intervention? So let's start with screening. We did this study, like I said, a few years ago up in Minnesota with a whole bunch of kids in 2nd and 3rd grade, 900 kids or so, second and 3rd grade. You can see the demographics there. It's a pretty white group of kids up in Minnesota. And we took the Fontes and Pinnell. Now, the teachers gave the FMP, and we did nothing for that. They just gave us their data. So I can't vouch for you that they did it correctly or anything like that. We got the data from the school. Now, I will say those are the data the school used for screening and for instructional decisions. We then gave each kid the Ames-Webb CBMR. So we took the oral reading fluency measure from Ames-Webb, the CBMR, and gave that to all these kids. That's a good, solid measure. It's got really good reliability. We did inter-observer agreement, got 99% basically, looked really good. And then we gave every kid the MAP. Now, MAP means Measures of Academic Progress. It's the NWEA test. It's a fine screener. It's a good overall measure of reading skill. And we wanted to see, so now I've got 3 measures. I've got Fontes and Pinnell, the benchmark assessment system. I've got Ames-Webb, and I've got MAP. So I'm going to set MAP as my criterion. I'd like to use the state test, but most state tests are so bad that they're not even worth looking at. Most state tests are so poorly constructed. Most state tests aren't designed for psychometric reasons. They're designed for political ones. So they're usually so bad you can't even use them. But the MAP is a good criterion. It's a good overall screen. And then we had so that's MAP is our criterion. We have 2 screeners we're looking at, Ames-Webb and the benchmark assessment system for Fontes and Pinnell. Collect all these data within just a brief 2-week window. Here's what we found. So there's 2 sets of data here. This, looking here, is the MAP. That's our criterion. And then this is the CBM Ames-Webb, and this is the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system, which I call the informal reading inventory. Okay. Now let's look at Ames-Webb first. Ames-Webb, of the MAP, there were 646 kids who did well on the MAP. Of those 646, 501 of them also did really well on Ames-Webb, or passed Ames-Webb, which is 86%. No, I'm sorry, 78%. Think of it like a grade. That's like a C+. It's passing, but it's not great. But I'm much more worried about this. Now, of the 322 kids who didn't do well on the MAP, 276 of them also did not pass the Ames-Webb screener. which is 86%, much better, B plus, much better. Overall correct classification of 80%. Again, B minus, not great, but I'm much more worried about identifying struggling readers than identifying good ones. I'm an interventionist. I can live with a kid getting an intervention doesn't need it. That's okay. Stay on, keep that, I don't want that to happen very often because that's a waste of a resource. But what I cannot accept is a kid needing an intervention and not getting them. We cannot accept these kids here who have a reading problem, but our measure didn't show that. That's not okay. So I want that number, I want sensitivity to be higher than specificity. The two are kind of a trade-off. So that's how well you identify kids who are struggling. It was 86%, not bad. Now, let's look at the Fontes and Pinnell. Of the 556 kids who did well on the map for this group, 367 of them did well on the benchmark assessment system, which is 66%, D plus, right? That's not great. It's not even acceptable. It's pretty low. But now let's look at of the 290 kids who did not do well on the map, only 90 of them did not do well on the F&P, which is only 31%. That's shockingly low. Like I can't even make that up. That's one of the lowest I've ever seen. 200 kids that were identified as just fine readers when really they weren't. That's really a problem. Overall correct classification of 54%, which means, I could buy the F&P, which costs thousands of dollars, I assume. I could train all my teachers how to do it, take 20 or 30 minutes per kid, or just give each teacher a quarter. You want to assess a kid? And you'll get it right just as often. It did not do a good job of identifying struggling readers. In fact, it did a very poor job of identifying struggling readers. So I question its utility as a screening tool. I don't think it was designed to be a screening tool, in all honesty. I don't trust test publishers. I don't trust publishers, period. When I wrote a book not long ago, and it was an intervention book. And we said we want the title of the book to be Intervention, Academic and Behavior Interventions. And the publisher said, well, we'd like the title to be RTI. And we said, well, it's not response to intervention, it's just intervention. I said, well, we'd like it to be RTI. Went back and forth. And finally, the publisher said, you know what? Your book's going to be titled RTI. And so we compromised. We said it would be RTI Applications, Behavior and Academic Interventions, something like that. So the book came out. I wish I had a copy of it here. The book came out, and it says in 3 big block letters, RTI, Applications, Interventions. It looks like a whole RTI book. And I think the reason they did that is they knew at the time those 3 words, those 3 letters were hot, and that would sell more books. I honestly think, I'm being cynical, freely admit this, I've never asked the publishers this, but the reason they decided to call the benchmark assessment system the benchmark assessment system and talk about using for screening is at the time, screening was becoming really popular and they knew it would sell more tests. In my opinion, it was not, and I clearly say in my opinion, it was not designed to be a screener. But there are actually aspects of the measure that are pretty cool. At the back of the measure are a bunch of screening, decoding measures, phonemic awareness, and those are actually kind of nice, but no one ever uses those. All we do is we give them this one measure and get that score. We put way too much weight on that score. So let me show you why I say that some more. So let's look at instructional. I have 3 sets of data I'm going to show you around these questions. This one's the most technical. Again, large number of 2nd and 3rd graders, different group of kids here. These are kids we worked with the Path to Reading Excellence in School Sites. That was a project I was involved with in Minnesota. I was at the University of Minnesota, where we built and implemented a tiered intervention system in 6 schools in Minneapolis so all kids would be proficient by end of 3rd grade. And it was fabulous. The results were great. So we took those kids, and in those schools, a lot of schools were using Fontes and Pinnell, so we did some comparisons. These are city schools, so you can see low number of white kids, lots of kids eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Now, again, this is the most technical one, so I'll explain it. What we're trying to predict here is the spring map score. Again, measures of academic progress, the spring map score. So we start off by predicting the spring map with the fall Ames web. Gave all the kids Ames web, and that predicted really well and got an R-square of 49%. So generally speaking, 15% or so, 14% is a large effect. 10 10, 12% is a moderate effect, and like 2% or so is a small effect. So we got a huge effect, right? Or fall, Ames Web predicts brain map really well. And then we combined fall, Ames Web, and fall, Fontes Pinnell, and we got another 5%. That's a small to moderate amount. It's not zero, but it's not very big. Then we looked at fall, Ames Web, fall, Fontes Pinnell, fall map. Now using that to predict spring map, and now we get 65%. So that's a huge increase, right? That's a 16 percentage point increase here, even a 12 or 11 point here. So from just using oral reading fluency to using all of these, it's a nice big jump. Now, then we took Fontes and Pinnell out of the equation, and oral reading fluency and map together got us 60%. That's an 11 point jump. Adding, you're better off just to use ORF, Ames Web, and map if you're going to do multiple screeners. Actually, I think you're better off to use just one of those. And if the kids score low, follow up with a second assessment. But the Fontes Pinnell did not increase decision-making accuracy when looking at the other data. And then lastly, the intervention. We took a bunch of second and third graders again. And this is a city school in Minnesota. And this time we took the Fontes and Pinnell. And so we said, if their reading level says they're supposed to be an M, can they actually read an M? If the Fontes Pinnell says they're supposed to be a G, can they actually read a G book? So again, this time we used Ames Web differently. We used Ames Web just to screen the kids. So second and third grade, we want to use Ames Web to see, are they a good reader, an average reader, or a low reader? Okay, so we put them in three groups based on the percentile rank. 75th percentile higher was a high reader, 25th to 50th was average reader, and below 25th was a low reader. Then the kids got the F&P, and we used books from the Fontes Pinnell system and simply observed them read. Now we wanted to come back to that original idea of 93 to 97%. So when the kids are reading these books at their level, can they read 93 to 97% of the words? What we found was, so these are correlations. These here are correlations. So we took the book, or took three books, and had them read each one for a minute. We wanted to see, did the book matter? If this book is an L, and I have three books that are L, and the kid's an L, we expected the percentage of words read correctly to be quite high. But you can see it was really not great. Correlation was like 0.47 to 0.68. It's pretty much higher than that. So then we decided, okay, if we just think of it as instructional frustration and independent level, do they do that? Is that consistent across these three books? And so we wanted to see, if it was frustration for book one, frustration for book two, frustration for book three, or frustration for book one, frustration for book two, independent for book three, something like that. And we correlated just the categories, those three categories. And again, 0.59 to 0.67. Not great. I was surprised, but it should be higher than that. And then now we wanted to see, I'll skip that one. So now we wanted to see, can they actually read the books? So this is the number of kids who are good readers, low readers, average readers, good readers. Percentage of time they were at frustration, instructional, or independent level. So let's look at the good readers. They were 2/3 of them. Now, these are small numbers. This needs to be replicated. But 2/3 of the time, they were at an independent level. So does that really represent their instructional level, or is their independent level? So I'm a little unsure about that. Same with the average readers. Most of the time, they're independent level. But the thing that's shocking is the low readers. Again, these are books written at their level. They're an L, they're reading an L. They couldn't read 93% of the words 58% of the time. So a majority of the time, the struggling readers could not read the book that was supposedly at their level. And I think there's a couple reasons why that's the case now. I think there's a couple reasons why that's the case. First of all, we put too much stock in that score. That's true with almost any test, but it's especially true with informal reading inventories. We forget the concept of standard error of measure. If you give a kid an IQ test, the IQ is 110. Their IQ is not 110. It's somewhere between probably 105 and 115. It's somewhere in a range. If we give the kid the IQ test 100 times, they'll score between 105 and 115, 95% of the time. So it's really kind of a range. That's true with every test. You get an observed score, but you have a true score. We don't really know what that true score is. All we know is your score falls somewhere around this range. And we give this test to you tomorrow, you might get a 15. The next day, you might get a 20. The next day, an 18. Those are all basically the same score. The standard error of measure for the benchmark assessment system, based on a paper we did a few years back, which we presented at multiple conferences but never published. So it hasn't really gone through peer review except peer review on conferences. We found a standard error of measure based on the standard deviation that they reported and the reliability data they reported. We found standard errors of measure of about plus or minus 2. So an L, keep using L, is really somewhere, this is always hard to do alphabetically, LMN, right? What, let's see, KJ, it's tough to do the alphabet backwards. So somewhere between J and N is that score, somewhere between J and N. And that means tomorrow, that L might be an M, might be a J, might be a K, might be an N. All those scores, psychometrically speaking, are equivalent. They're the same score. So if we look at a score and say, oh, the kid's an L, he needs to read an L book. No, we don't really know that. We know it's somewhere between this range, maybe, this plus or minus 2. And that's, by the way, is true for all informal reading inventories. There's a standard error of measure. We just tend to ignore it. We think, oh, it's 2.8 means 2.8. No, 2.8 means probably somewhere between 2.0 and 3.8 or something. I'm making these numbers up. So standard error of measure, that's one problem. Another problem is these measures tend to have very low reliability. Just sit down with the Fontes-L or DRA or something like that and just look at the passages. Sometimes a passage that is a 2.8 seems easier than a 2.5 or something like that. Sometimes the M's seem easier than the L's, but they're supposed to be harder. So just go look at those. And also, they don't report reliability. And most independent evaluations of reliability report low scores. But the thing that's baffling about this, so a couple of years ago, I used to do reviews for Mental Measurement Yearbook. Mental Measurement Yearbook is great. It's Mental Measurements Yearbook. It's a wonderful resource. And every year, whenever new tests come out, during that year, they send those tests off to people to review them. And then they publish these reviews. So basically, any test ever constructed, there's a review in Mental Measurements Yearbook, which is really great. All right. Let me respond real quick before I make this point to Tisha. It said they can't read the books at their level. I thought the test is scored by seeing what level they can read. Correct. So you give them the test, and the test says level L. It's a sample from this particular page. But then you go to pick a book that's supposedly at their level, that's at that L, and they couldn't actually read it. Is it useful for anything for struggling readers? I'll come back to that in a second. Should you replace it? Maybe. I'll come back to that in a second. But anyway, so I reviewed the tests for Mental Measurement Yearbook. And a few years back, you don't get to pick the test you get. It just shows up. You get a box. So I get a box, Burroughs, Mental Measurement Yearbook. Oh, great. It's my test. Open it up. It was the Jerry Johns Basic Reading Inventory, one of the most commonly used IRIs at the time. I was so excited. I pulled that out and like, oh, this is great. I opened it up and I started reading it. It said on page 4, tests used for educational decisions must be reliable and valid. Those 2 words appeared nowhere else in that entire book. There was no evidence for reliability, no evidence for validity whatsoever. And the person, I meant to look this up before I started, I forgot. The person who reviewed the Jerry Johns before I did, his conclusion, or her conclusion was brilliant. At the end, it said, reviewing the Jerry Johns Basic Reading Inventory is a lot like reviewing the music of the Grateful Dead. Either you get it and you think it's incredible and it's changed your life, or you don't understand it at all and you don't think it's, just don't get it. Either way, nothing I say will change your mind. And that's exactly it. I don't know why that's the case. These measures are not designed to do the types of tasks for which we ask them to do. They're not screeners. They're very bad screeners. I would argue they're not even very good at identifying a level that the kid's supposed to be reading at. Now, does that mean you should dismiss them completely? Well, no. As an interventionist, when I sit down with a kid, if I'm going to work with the kid, the very first thing I'm going to do is have that kid read to me from a grade level text. And that's invaluable. That's so important. What I have no stock in is the score. That 2.8, that L, that whatever it is. I have no stock in that score. I wish we'd quit focusing on the score. As I mentioned, many of these informal reading inventories have measures in there, like phonemic awareness and decoding. Those can be helpful. Having a kid read you from a graded passage is helpful. So my take is I would not use it for screening. I would not use it for screening. If a kid scores low, I might use it for diagnostic purposes, just for the kids who score low to see, what types of tasks can they do and not do. But again, I have no stock in, well, they're an L, they should be this L board. So should you get rid of it? I don't know. I certainly would be careful how you use it. I certainly wouldn't use it for screening. And again, in even kids who are struggling readers, I pay no attention to that score. And I'll show you instead what to do in just a few minutes. Okay. All right. So let me real briefly comment on LLI, because these two things go together. If you don't know what that is, that's called leveled literacy intervention. And that's the intervention side of the font system panel. Okay, that's the intervention side of it. So it's where once a child's identified struggling, you deliver this intervention. It's a very much. I'm going to speak my interpretation of it. If others have different approaches or different thoughts about it, I would welcome that. But it's basically a leveled reading approach. So you get the kids who are at the same level. They sit down together, read books together, and you work on their reading skills from those books that are supposedly at their level. Well, so I did a study. Now, I mentioned the Path of Reading Excellence in School Sites. We did this press project a few years back, and we tried to develop, or did develop, an intervention approach that targets what the kids need. And for time's sake, I can't really get into it, what we do, but we really go through a bunch of series of diagnostic assessments to figure out if the kid needs decoding, we focus on decoding heavily. If the kid needs phonemic awareness, we focus on phonemic awareness heavily. Not exclusively. If a kid needs phonemic awareness, we're still going to be teaching letters and letter sounds with it. If a kid needs decoding, we're still going to maybe do a phonemic awareness warm up, and they're still going to read connected text. But if I have 20 minutes to work with a kid and they need decoding, 15 minutes of that is going to be decoding. It might be 1 minute for warm up for phonemic awareness and like a 3, 4, 5 minute read at the end. The rest of that time, I'm really going to hit decoding. So we developed that system, and we wanted to compare it to a more comprehensive approach. So one of the schools in which we worked did LLI, and they wanted to keep doing it. So we said, okay, fine, you work with some kids and we'll work with some kids. They wouldn't let us randomly assign. And to this day, I still don't know how they picked the kids for LLI, but they were similar. It wasn't like they were the low kids, the high kids. They were kind of similar. Why they picked those kids, to this day, I don't know. But we compared them to targeted intervention to LLI. So there's two groups of kids, actually three groups of kids. This is what we found. So again, three groups. Targeted, those are kids the press kids that we did decoding for decoding, fluency for fluency. Then we had comprehensive, that's LLI. And then we have tier 1. These are kids who were good readers before we started. No one intervened with these kids. These are just the good readers before we did anything. Among the kids who were targeted, we saw an average Ames Web growth per week growth of 1.33 words per minute per week. Third grade, 1.23. Tier 1 was 1.25 and 1.03. That's kind of fuzzy. I'm sorry, it's hard to see. So our kids grew at a rate that exceeded the kids who were good readers, right? 1.33, 1.25, 1.23, 1.03. So for our kids, the gap got smaller. The gap between struggling reader and good reader got smaller. Now, granted, not to the rate I'd like to see, but still, it grew at a rate that exceeded the tier 1. Look at LLI, 1.07.94. So not only did they not grow as much as our kids did, kids we're working with, significantly, by the way, less, they grew at a rate that was less than tier 1. So for our kids, the gap got smaller, but for kids who are getting LLI, the gap got bigger. And again, I put this on social media the other day. I'll briefly do this, but there's been 3 studies I know of that look at LLI besides the one I just talked about and a few others, but 3 that are good, solid, randomized design studies. This one's out of Memphis. I think all 3 might be out of the same group. And they reported significant effects, all that. Well, I went and looked, they did not report effect sizes. So I went and computed the effect size. I found in kindergarten the effect size of 0.26, 0.36, and negative negative 0.09. So for kids in second grade, the kids who didn't get the intervention did better than the kids who did. But now there's this new thing where ESSA, other groups are talking about grading the LLI very positively. But remember, there's 3 studies now, this one plus 2 more. And what they're rating is the quality of the research. These are random designs. These are good studies. But what they've consistently found is small effects. And by the way, they say this in these reports. If you're interested in the, I just realized I took the citation out to make this fit better. That was an accident, sorry about that. So if you're interested in this, if you actually just Google leveled literacy intervention report, you'll find it. But if you need it, you email me, I'll happily send it to you. And then if you search my Twitter account, BurnsMK1, I just tweeted this the other day, and the citations are in there. But this is what is the criterion for a medium effect. And so using the Font Disciplinal benchmark assessment system, so these two measures here are their own, the Font Disciplinal measure, we still see small effects. Star reading, small effect. DRA, negative effect. Fluency measure, alphabetics, small effects. Now, just for comparison, I didn't mean to compare these two directly, but I said, just to show you that there's other interventions out there that have good effects. Here's Sound Partners, a wonderful intervention. It's based on decoding. It's very decoding heavy. It's a great tool. If you're interested, look at intensiveintervention.org, the National Center for Intensive Intervention, intensiveintervention.org. There's a beautiful, wonderful report about it on there. Go to the tools chart. Go to intensiveintervention.org and go to the tools chart, and you'll see all the reading interventions. But here, RAT-R is a reading test, similar to the STAR, but it's individual administered, and STAR is a better measure probably, but effect size is huge. A measure of word attack, decoding, effect size was huge. Spelling, decoding, fluency, accuracy. And even among kindergartners, we still saw mostly medium to large effects, with a few that were kind of borderline, but way bigger than this. So there are interventions out there that we get good effects. LLI just isn't one of them. So in my opinion, yeah, there's good research. There's good evidence that F&P don't screen well, don't add any variance to decision-making, don't estimate reading very well, and LLI is not effective. I think the research is pretty conclusive. I can say confidently that the evidence states that. All right, so far I've talked about why we level and why we shouldn't. So what do we do instead? Well, the good news is that for most kids, it doesn't matter. Honestly, that's not true. Let me rephrase that. If it's a good reader, it doesn't matter. So Lexile, most measures have a Lexile in them. And Lexile works just as well as anything else. And it's usually part of the measure that you're already using. In fact, Lexile probably works better to estimate reading levels than most, but not, there certainly has its limitations. There certainly have its limitations, but Lexile is probably fine for most kids. And if it's a good reader, it really doesn't matter all that much. Like a good reader is going to do well, regardless of the book you give them, right? A good reader is going to figure it out, can interact with it. Like, yes, you want to be within approximate the range. Absolutely, Lexile will accomplish that just fine. But for good readers, it doesn't really matter all that much. But it does matter for struggling readers. And for struggling readers, I rely on curriculum-based assessment or instructional design. I've alluded to that. I've used that term a couple of times now. But it's curriculum-based assessment or instructional design. Again, coming back to Ed's original model here, original study, this 93 to 97%, that's what curriculum-based assessment for instructional design is based on. It tries to assess where in those 3 categories the student falls for an individual reading task. By the way, we replicated Ed's original study, and we didn't find quite as shocking data as he did because we used, I think, arguably stronger single case design methodology. But you see, we still saw higher time on task for instructional level, and then frustration, and even independent level was low. If you're interested, I'll plug my book here real quickly. I've got a book on this, How to Do All This, with myself and David Parker, published by Guilford. But essentially it looks like this. I think I was trying to decide, keep looking over, see if I have time. I think I have time. Let me see if I can do this. So I want to save at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. Okay, hopefully you're seeing my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel now. So this is my YouTube page, and I have a bunch of cool videos here. Some are, whenever an author or a researcher publishes a cool study, I call them up and I'll do an interview, a quick 10, 15-minute interview about what they did and what they found. So I try and take this study and make it really consumable to practitioners. Some are modeling different interventions. That's a couple of these are different interventions. So here's a whole bunch of videos, but I'm gonna show you this one right here. Where'd it go? Here it is. Here it is. This will take, let's see, about a minute. So I have time.
Matthew.
And what grade are you in?
First.
We're going to pretend that he's an older student and using older student stuff, so we kind of try to find some stuff that's kind of hard for him. We're going to do a curriculum-based assessment for instructional design. This is a book that we're pretending he's going to use in class today. It's part of his reading curriculum. It's Harry and the Dinosaurs Go Wild. So I will randomly turn to 3 pages in time for 1 minute. Matthew, start right there. Do your very best reading. If you come to words you don't know, I'll tell you what it is. Keep reading to tell you to stop. Okay? Okay. So I sit down with the kid and I have him take the book he's going to use, whatever it is he's going to read in class, whatever is part of his reading instruction he's going to read. I ask him to read it out loud for me and I record. And as I record, I usually photocopy and follow along and mark errors. Now I'm not doing error analysis. I'm just marking right or wrong. I could talk about error analysis some other time, but I don't have a lot of faith in the reliability of decisions based on error analysis. So I'm not doing error analysis here. I'm just simply saying right or wrong. That's it. And he reads for a minute. So I'm not going to hear for a whole minute. Have you watch him read?
Giraffe.
Just get a sense.
Best. And
Nan.
Liked the
Zebras. Jump ahead a little bit now.
Wait, funny.
Good.
But the
Keep going.
him.
Stop there. Okay, so time it for 1 minute. Okay, good job. Now, we'll count them. The reason we do 1 minute is that's a good sample of the reading. It creates enough data for it to be reliable. And if you go beyond a minute, you go 2, 3, 4 minutes, you don't get much more accurate decision making. So that's why we do 1 minute. And I go through and count the words. Let's see. 19 out of 24.
Hey, Mommy, can you sit down so I can see?
Stop for a second. That was my daughter. Sorry. Okay, and then also can see how that turned out.
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With Grammarly, you can find really good.
The same thing?
So we do 19 divided by 24 equals 79% correct. So we had 19 correct words out of 24 words. So 19 words with 5 errors. 79.2% correct. Now we would do this again, but we're not going to because we don't need to model it. We're going to randomly turn to 3 pages and have them read. So let's just pretend that this 79.2% was one of 3 scores. And that he also had 88% and 74.5%. So the median percentage is within the frustration range because we want it to be 93% to 97%. So since it's lower than that, this would not be a good book to use, or we'd have to pre-teach. So what I want to do next is pre-teach just for a second, and a couple different ways to pre-teach. Okay, so here's the procedures I just described. Just have the kid read you. Now, I only do this with kids who are struggling readers. Again, good readers, you probably don't need this level of specificity. Lexile is fine. Even most average readers. But if I have a struggling reader, then I'm probably going to get this level of specificity have the kid read to me from the book, from whatever you're using, and see, can he read 93 to 97% of the words correctly? We've done lots of studies with it. We see good reliability. We look at inter-rater reliability, alternate form, test retest, and test retest just looking at instructional independent or frustration level. And you can see we get 0.8 to 0.9 really consistently. And now this is my favorite studies I've ever done. Took a group of kids who were LD in reading, and they were at baseline, very similar. We randomly assigned to one or two groups. These are kids who were in third or fourth grade. I forget which grade, might have been fourth. We randomly assigned them. So we had 60 kids from a bunch of different classrooms, special ed classrooms, all LD in reading, very similar skills, randomly assigned to one or two different groups. The treatment group was, we took the reading material and we pre-taught words. And we weren't teaching sight words. I'm really clear about that. I do not advocate for a sight word approach to reading. All we did was sit down, maybe look through it, find some unknown words, practice those words with the kid, just so when they went to go get reading instruction, they could participate. And the control group did kind of a guided reading, sat down with the kids the same amount of time, one-on-one, had them read to us, asked them questions about what they read, that type of thing. So you can see our kids increased by 1.81 words per minute per week, and the control group by 0.42, which is, of course, a huge effect. Had we used RTI for LD identification, 2/3 of the kids who were identified as LD in the treatment group made sufficient growth that they would not have been identified as LD. 2/3 of them. And then we wanted to see, well, does this pre-teaching thing we did facilitate an instructional level? So in baselines, we measured instructional level 5 times, had them read to us 93 to 97%. And in baseline, both groups were identical. They were frustration level 83% of the time, just from material picked reading for class instruction. Instructional level 17%, none were independent level. And you can see with the exception of 1 week, they were at the instructional level 2/3 of the time. Control group was at the instructional level, less than half. The correlation between how much they grew and how many times they read at an instructional level was 0.80, crazy high. How well a child progressed was directly related to how often they read the materials at an instructional level. Again, we replicate this a bunch of different ways. These are kids who are EBD, emotional behavior disorder. And we came in, all we did was a simple pre-teaching activity so they could read the words at 93 to 97% and then just observed instruction. And this little guy went from 75% on task to 80, 90% on task. Same. Now this little guy was in kindergarten. I mean, it was so sad. How do you diagnose a kindergartner with emotional behavior disorder? You can imagine the type of behavior problem he was seeing. He was on task, 40, 50% of the time. Now we're not pre-teaching words, we're pre-teaching letter sounds, things like that, letters, letter names. We got him on task 75% of the time. Kindergartner, 75% of the time. We were pretty excited about that. And then another one, Christopher here, thing got cut off. Same thing, on task 40% of the time. We got him on task about 70% of the time. Now, this is a study we looked at because people say kids are off task, just have them read high interest material. So there's 4 conditions here. There's instructional level high interest, instructional level low interest, frustration level high interest, frustration level low interest. Okay, and you can see that basically they were all over the place. We didn't see much differentiation there. So we peeled it back. So let's just look at interest. Forget instructional level, just look at interest. You can see high interest, low interest. This is time on task again. The two sets of data, really no differentiation. They kind of laid on top of each other, didn't really see much. Okay, let's forget interest, just look at instructional level. Now you see consistently instructional level time on task was higher than frustration level time on task. So interest, sure, have them read high interest, that's fine. But if they can't read it, it's not going to matter. Instructional level still wins. And then this little guy, I think for time's sake, I'll skip this. This is, or just real briefly, this is, they're doing repeated reading with this kid, and it wasn't working. They called us up and said, well, we looked at his accuracy. He wasn't reading 93 to 97% of the words. So we suggested doing something called Duet Reading. It's on my YouTube channel, a video of it. It's a modeling intervention where you model reading for the kid to increase their accuracy. Got him accurate, and then look at his rate of growth. This is words read correct per minute there compared to there. Repeated reading, duet reading, back to repeated reading, they did much better. in three situations, the same kid, different kids, same situation, really low fluency, but his accuracy was low. Like, you guys, you're torturing this poor kid. Stop. So he switched to duet reading, got him accurate, and then switched back to repeated reading. Look at his rate of growth there compared to there. Third kid, repeated reading not working, get him accurate, switch back to repeated reading, and compare the two rates of growth. Much better.
Dr. Burns, we do have until 5:30, so I think
we do.
maybe until we have 5. Yeah, we got plenty of
I thought
time.
we had an hour. Oh, okay, good. All right, thank you. All right, that was hurting a little bit then. All right, so you can see in this case, we used instructional level to help identify types of intervention the kid need. Well, if I have that time, I'll take it real briefly. I won't show you the whole intervention. I'll show it to you brief, just a little bit of it. Okay, there we go. Called duet reading.
This is a reading intervention.
So with duet reading, you have the kid read to you, and you do error correction after every error. So she reads for a minute and does error correction.
We're still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Okay, good.
3. It goes by many names, such as supported or assistant close reading. Today helping me is
Karma,
and what grade are you in, Karma?
2nd grade.
By the way, this is David Klingbeil, who's now an assistant professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So as I mentioned, he has her read to him for an hour, for a minute, and he does error correction. I'm not going to have you watch that. Let's jump ahead to the duet reading part. So she reads for an hour, he follows along and does immediate error correction. And at the end of the minute,
Again.
Okay. Now we are going to read together. I am going to read the first word, so I, and then you will read the next word, was, and then we'll go back and forth reading every other word until the end of the passage. Do you have any questions? Okay, let's begin. I
Was
walking
down
the
road,
and
found
a
map,
it
was
neat.
I
Picked
it
up
to
see
where
it
would
take.
me.
Okay, let's stop there. Typically, you would finish the entire passage, and then after that, let's try it again. This time, you read the first word, and I will read the second word.
I
Was
walking
down
the
road,
and
found
a
map.
it
Was
neat.
I
you get the idea. All right, so it's a cool intervention. I will be really careful to point out that that's only effective if the child has good decoding skills. So the reason that the kid's not reading accurately is not because of poor decoding, which was the case with these kids. So we found these kids had that they were getting repeated reading because that was the right intervention for them. They had good decoding skills. They had low fluency. They were really working on fluency, but their accuracy was too low. And so we said, let's switch the intervention, focus more on accuracy. And then we did that. We saw more growth once we switched back to the fluency intervention. So we know that that informal reading inventories have poor reliability usually, don't identify struggling readers, oftentimes don't identify text the kid read very well. The LLI as an intervention I don't think is very effective based on the research. And we've done several studies with curriculum-based assessment for instructional design that can be used to identify if a child can read this text at an instructional level or not. So why do we do it? Because instructional level is important. We know that, we get that. But also keep in mind this, one more point. Data never generalize to or from an individual. So let's say I give this kid this measure, and let's say it's an L or 2.8, whatever that means. And let's say that's a valid indication of the kid's reading skill. And let's say this book is actually an L, whatever that means. Just because it matches up doesn't mean the child will be able to read that text or not. How well a child reads a text has more to do with their background knowledge and vocabulary around a particular topic than it does the supposed difficulty level of the text. So really, for struggling readers, the only way to identify if they can read it is to sample the reading with them, CBA ID, and see if they can read it or not. Okay. Now, I think next. So this is my email address and my Twitter handle. So if you want to email me, please feel free to do so. Tweet me or follow me on Twitter. That'd be great. So we do have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I think I'll do is maybe stop sharing. Jesse, jump in and tell me if you want me to do something else.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Just run some of these questions and then
Yeah, we can pick some of the questions out of the chat or out of the Q&A.
What's that?
Yeah, let's pick some questions out of the Q&A.
Great, please. Okay, so let's see. Okay, iReady. So iReady is a diagnostic measure. Now, iReady is different. Well, that's not true. It's different in some important ways. If you use iReady as the diagnostic tool, it actually does a pretty good job of identifying some basics, some big buckets, decoding versus fluency. So as the diagnostic measure, I find it intriguing. There are other uses for it that I probably wouldn't use, but if you're using it for diagnostic, I think it does that actually pretty well. I have a grant submitted right now to study that, to study how well it does identify reading levels, and not reading levels, reading deficits, and does that work? Can we use that to target intervention? I responded to Tisha, hopefully adequately. Yeah, again, Todd, is the VAS a useful assessment for anything for struggling readers? Should you replace it? I'm not going to recommend replacing or buying anything like that. Using it to drive instruction makes me nervous. First of all, if I assume it's being used, and if this is wrong, tell me. You're going to take all the L's, put them together, and deliver intervention. Or instruction. Remember, keep in mind standard error of measure. So 4 kids who are supposedly an L might have actually different levels to begin with. So that's true. But also, just because you're at an L or J or W or whatever it is, and you can have 4 kids who are all at a K or whatever, they still might have very different reading needs. So I encourage you to look at the group kids based on skill, not level. Assess their decoding. And there's all kinds of free decoding inventories out there. Assess their phonemic awareness, assess their fluency, and there's all kinds of free measures online for all of those. And they're probably just fine. So I'm going to look at those skills and use that to group kids. So I've got the really low decoders. That's one group. I've got good decoders who still struggle with fluency. That's another group. That type of thing. That's a better way to drive instruction, to look at other types of data. And for struggling readers, I put no confidence in that score. Oh, by the way, I will say Fontes Pinnell, like I said earlier, at the end of it, has some good decoding measures, some good phonemic awareness measures that do these things I'm talking about. So you can do skill-based grouping. Okay. Placement. Data isn't used for instructional placement. I'm reading it. It's a fairly lengthy comment here. Do you have a place to look for data related to STAR and its reliability for this use? I think looking at placement with STAR, I think that's based on Lexile, I assume. And if I'm not understanding your question correctly, please correct me. But if it's based on Lexile, well, that's I would argue that's probably one of the better ways to do it. Still not perfect, still not great, but a Lexile is a much more consistent rating. The grade level ratings can vary quite a bit depending on how they do it, but Lexile is usually fairly consistent. So while it's not going to be perfect, it's probably better than anything else that exists. Programs I suggest for older elementary kids who probably need comprehension support. I love these questions. This is one of my favorite things in the world, is to look at interventions and see what they do, et cetera. So again, I'll be cautious to say, be sure to use level, be sure to address, I almost said levels. Be sure to address skills, assess the skill level and see what skill the kid's struggling and address that in your intervention. But for 4th and 5th grade for comprehension, I rely heavily on reciprocal teaching. Anything I talk about has to be 2 criteria. It has to be cheap, has to be easy. Because if it ain't cheap and it ain't easy, I don't care how much research is done, it ain't gonna happen. And so reciprocal teaching, you can buy on Amazon for like $40. It's been around for, I don't know, I think the first study was maybe 1984. And saw good effects on reading comprehension. And then a few years back, some very smart woman, I hope she makes $1 million, some very smart woman wrote a book on how to do it. And it always just existed in sort of journal articles. So she was so smart to do that. I'm so jealous I didn't think of it, but I highly recommend it. I think it's I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the author's last name is I think it's Ozkus. Something like that, might not be quite right. Ozkus, I'm not sure. But that's a great tool for comprehension. Older kids who need decoding, I really use Anita Archer stuff a lot. Rewards used to be cheap and easy, but it became popular. So now it's fairly expensive. It's still not hard. It's fairly expensive. She has a new one out. I can't know what's called. If someone knows what I'm talking about, please put it in the chat or something. It's called Phonics, something Phonics, Easy Phonics, something like that. And that seems intriguing as well. It's much, much cheaper. So there's good programs for that for kids in 4th and 5th grade. So 4th and 5th grade, I'm a heavy comprehension fluency. For fluency, just do repeated reading. Read Naturally is a program. But repeated reading is pretty simple. Okay, I'm gonna have to show you this. Let me pull it up before I share my screen. All right, so if you haven't seen this, I highly recommend it. It's called readworks.org, readworks.org. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful little tool. If you flip content here, you can search for reading passages. I want to look at reading passages. And I want, let's say, you can do it by grade level, but you can do it by Lexile. You can do it by type. Let's say I want to do Lexile. I've got a kid who's Lexile. Now, don't get too hung up on the score in Lexile. Let's say the kid's Lexile is 450. Well, for 450, I'm probably going to search between 400 and 550. Or 500, I'm sorry. That's close enough. And then here a whole bunch comes up like that. You click on one, you get a nice little PDF you can download and use. It's all based on Lexile, among other things. And you can sort this by topic, by whatever. So if I might do repeated reading, just find passages here at the kids' instructional level and just do repeated reading with these passages. It's called readworks.org. It's all free.
For those of you listening after the fact here to the recording, Andrea put in the Q&A, Lori OCZKUS, who was the author of that book on reciprocal teaching. Thank you, Andrea Setmeyer, president of the Reading League Indiana. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So this person asked, Pam asked about Jan Richardson's running records, which do not require timing. The issue with running record is, number one, it's again sampling this reading and assuming that generalizes to the universe of reading. If that's true, it usually doesn't. It almost never does. Nothing against running records, just it doesn't generalize. Things just don't generalize very well. So you have to really assess, can the kid read whatever it is you're actually asking them to read, number one. Number two, it depends on what they do. So if it's a rating, in some running records, you rate fluency, you rate things like that. If that's the case, then I don't have much confidence in that. But if it's in running records, I think, I don't use them to monitor the progress because they don't have the psychometrics as an Ames Web or something like that. But for diagnostic decisions, they're not terrible. But you have to make sure you're actually counting words read correctly, percentages, et cetera, and not just doing ratings. And even then, it won't generalize to the universe of reading books. Twitter handle again is BurnsMK1, Burns MK. M is in Matthew, K is in Kevin, Burns MK1. Scholastic reading inventory, just like all the rest. There are some reading inventories are better than others, but being a good reading inventory is like being a good third baseman in Italy. Doesn't mean you're good, just means you might be better than all the rest. So Scholastic reading inventory, fine. They're all almost all of them have the same shortcomings, like don't generalize, oftentimes poor reliability, etc. But there's certainly some that are better than others. Kid scores low on reading fluency. What diagnostic measure would you recommend? So there's, again, lots of them. If the kid scores low on reading fluency, then I'll do their decoding. And we developed one with Press, so I use that one. But Google decoding inventory. They're all fine. I mean, decoding is decoding. It's a pretty straightforward process to assess. Phonemic awareness, again, we developed one for Press that measures 4 things: isolating sounds, blending them, manipulating them, and isolating, blending, segmenting, manipulating. There we go. Isolating, segmenting, blending, manipulating. You just want to see, can the kid do those 4 things? Generally speaking, if the kid struggles on one of those 4 things, they're probably really struggling with phonemic awareness. So CBID is different than DIBELS because it doesn't measure reading fluency, it primarily looks at reading accuracy to assess instructional level, and it's taken from the kid's reading material. It's not a standardized measure. It does not attempt to generalize, can the kid read this, to can the kid read the universe of books. It attempts to generalize from can the kid read this book to this book, and that's it. Also, CBA ID is a strong tool for diagnostic decisions. It's not a good tool to monitor progress. Dibbles is still the best way, Dibbles, AimsWeb, FastBridge, to monitor progress. You can't beat Dibbles and all those. CBA ID is not designed to monitor progress. It's designed to see, can the kid read it? Any free decoding inventory found online. Again, my favorite is the one we developed through Press, which I don't know if that's free or not. If you Google Press Minnesota, you'll find it. It's presscommunity.org, and there is a free side to that, but I don't know if the reading inventories are part of that. And by the way, you can pay $100 to belong to the website and get all this videos and interventions and assessments. I get no royalties from that. So me talking about it doesn't benefit me financially. But CBID used for decodable text? Yeah, of course. Any kind of reading material that you're asking a kid to read. Yes, absolutely. Are decoding inventories reliable? Again, almost all of them, yes, because I mean, can you say D for D? I mean, that's a pretty easy yes/no decision to get. And the universe of decoding is pretty limited. So they're pretty easy to get reliable on. So almost any Google decoding inventory will be just fine. Could you repeat what is a good use of F&P? Well, again, at the back, so having a kid read to you through graded text is so important, but I'm gonna listen to what the kid can and can't do and such. I have no faith in the score. But at the back, they have decoding measures and phonemic awareness measures and other things like that I think are actually fine to use. Of course, you can get those same measures for free by Googling it, but so there are aspects of the F&P I think are fine. It's just it's not used in a way I would suggest usually. Does the variance in the English impact on the assessment data you receive? For example, using American-based assessments? Oh, I don't know. I don't know, Sarah. Sarah asked, this research is all done in English speaking with things developed here in the States. Does this generalize to American-based assessments in Australia? I have no idea. It's a great question. If you want to collaborate on the study to answer that question, please email me. I'd love to do that. Rewriting district's early success screen. Oh, cool. Any early screening tool you'd recommend for K3 areas of concern? If you email me, oh, you're anonymous. Shoot. I would share those press things with you. And I could probably even find a couple I would recommend that by Googling it, but most of them, again, are just fine. Oh, there's lots of Australian people. I love this. Antoinetta, if I said your name correctly, hopefully. Teach at a year 5-2 school for 5-12 schools for boys. What test do you advise? So the older kids, the screening tool really should focus on comprehension. Year 5, that's right about the borderline where comprehension becomes the better screener. So STAR and MAP, I know a lot of international schools. I do a lot of work with the international, forget the organization, but there's an international group that built MTSS. I do a lot of work with them, and I know a lot of international schools use MAP, and that's a fine screener, middle school, high school. Upper elementary, maybe as well. Year 5 or so, age 10 to 12, probably fine. It's definitely a better measure for screening than oral reading fluency or something like that for 5th grade and up, because you can do those MAP and STAR measures as a group. So I usually start with those for that age group. What grade level the text is? Yeah, anonymous attendee, I don't know who you are, I'm sorry, but is there a way to recommend what grade level the text is? Lexile is about the best we got. Otherwise, it's can the kid read it? I don't really care what grade level it's at. Can the kid read it or not? So that's why I use CBA ID. But Lexile is about the best we got right now. Oh no, districts provide, Dr. Hetrich has moved to providing LLI within special ed classrooms, level of reading in general and elementary. What advice would you give in starting more to move administration to a more evidence-based approach? Oh no, LLI in a special ed classroom. So here's what that looks like. We're doing leveled reading at tier 1. I'm guessing core instruction. Probably leveled reading for intervention, like LLI type thing, etc. And if that doesn't work, special ed is more of the same. So the issue with LLI is, remember, the definition of special ed is and always has been individualized instruction to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. LLI does not individualize. So by definition, it's a problem. Now, I will say this. I did a study a few years ago. Gosh, whose dissertation was this? I think it was Matt Hall's dissertation. And we looked at FMP LLI versus targeted. And the kids in LLI did really well. So we went and talked to all the teachers and said, what are you doing? Every single time the teachers brought some decoding and phonics stuff with them and they were infusing that into it. So if you're doing that, then you'll see more success. But then if you're doing that, why buy LLI? Just do decoding with the kids and do readworks.org to have them read to get connected text reading. How do I convince your administration? I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't know. That baffles me because I'm a researcher. Data are my muse. I do what they tell me to do. And if I ever see us, 5-6 studies that say LLI works great, my next conversation like this will be supporting it. But until that happens, I won't. But because I've seen 3 studies that show it doesn't work, I can't get my head around people who would not then stop using. So I'm afraid I'm not much help there, except to say the definition of special ed is individualized instruction, and can LLI do that? Thank you, Andrea, for Lori OCZKUS. That's it. Phonics for reading. Yes, thank you, Cheryl. That's exactly it. I think it's a new one. I think it's pretty new. It's a lot cheaper. I'm not sure what happened. I'd love to ask her. Because rewards has been so popular, but it got expensive. And all of a sudden there's this new one for a third of the price. So that's a good one. Duet reading for those needing reading intervention. What do you use for interventions for kids with decoding issues? Again, phonics for reader or rewards. Rewards is written explicitly, written directly for kids 4th through 6th grade. So that is that's 4th grade and above. So it's almost perfect for those kids. I'll say it more slowly. It's in the Q&A here, but it's OCZKUS. She wrote the book on reciprocal teaching. I'm sorry, I'm responding to a question that I read. You didn't know what I was thinking there, so that's the person who wrote the book on reciprocal teaching. FastBridge is great. I'm on the research board for FastBridge, so I'll admit that to you, but I don't get paid for it. FastBridge, now I don't do research in that area. My colleague Ted Christ, who developed FastBridge, he told me this many years ago, that Easy CBM, which is also free, by the way, Easy CBM, all one word, just Google Easy, EASY CBM. Easy CBM and Ames Web were good. They were good measures. Dibbles was still fine, but probably not as good as these two. So he developed FastBridge to be even better. So FastBridge to monitor progress and A reading is a great screener. It's a good tool. What's used to measure progress for accountability? Yeah, geez, you can't use BAS for monitoring progress. Here's why. Remember, standard error of measure plus or minus 2. I'll see a teacher who went, wow, my kid went from a J all the way up to an M. Isn't that great? J, K, L, M. That means psychometrically speaking, those two scores are equivalent. They're the same. I sometimes don't say it to the teacher because they're all excited, but no, J to an M is basically measurement error. If they go J to W, it's a different conversation. But for the most part, no, they're not good measures. It's not a good measure of monitor progress. There's too much, there's not enough gradient. Those standard errors of measure and the gradients of the measure is so macro, and the standard error of measure is so big that it just doesn't work, monitor progress. Monitor progress with Dibbles, Ames Web, Easy CBM, FastBridge. Those are the ones that I recommend. I keep mentioning Lexiles, but
could you, for the folks who are listening after the fact, could you read the questions?
Yes, thank you.
Out from the chat? I feel like I'm falling down on my moderator job here. You're just spitting it out so many gems after gems that I don't want to interrupt.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I get excited and forget as well. That question was, how do you monitor progress if you're using BAS? And as soon as I saw the words BAS for monitoring progress, I forgot what I was doing and just started talking. I mentioned Lexiles. What do you think of beginning reader Lexile levels? Are they accurate for matching children decodable text? Probably as accurate as anything we have. But again, for struggling readers, I'm still going to look at the CBA IDs to want to see, can they read that particular text? Because Lexile is not perfect either. For good readers, doesn't matter as much, but for struggling readers, I'm really going to hit that hard. Oh, thank you, Sharon Dunn. I find Acadian's criterion-based universal screening so incredibly powerful, more so than Dibbles 8. What are your thoughts? Acadians and Dibbles or developed from the same idea. Acadience is the extension of early Dibbles from the same people. I hope that's being clear. So I agree. I am a fan of Acadience over the new Dibbles 8. I think it's a stronger measure, and I really should start talking about Acadience instead of Dibbles. Acadience is a good measure to use. Let's see. Oh no, darn it. So Beth just asked, what's the name of the international group that designs MTSS? The acronym is RIS, I think. International, I don't remember the acronym even. I'm so sorry. I can try and Google it in a few minutes here, but I don't remember the name of it. Let's see. So yeah, so at the end, I'll repeat my email address again. So for teachers who are strongly tied to reading levels, I often get asked the question, what do you use to determine reading levels, specifically when reporting to parents? I'm thinking refer to Lexile level. Yep, provided from our Ames Web screenings and progress monitoring. Yep, exactly. Lexile is the best we got. You can explain Lexile to them. See, the difficulty is with parents is if I say, well, they read at 3rd grade level and they're in 4th grade, they think they really understand what that means. And they don't. Most people don't. 4th grade level, 3rd grade level is within the range of normalcy, first of all. Number one. Number two, standard error of measure, no matter how you measure it, sometimes it's 3rd grade, sometimes it's 4th grade, sometimes it's 5th grade. And it promotes typological thinking. It's just, I really am hesitant to give the parents something they can so easily misinterpret, like grade level. So that's why I like Lexile better. When reporting to parents, I would use Lexile. Trying to help my district establish a couple of evidence-based interventions for the Big Five. Good. Help you identify bare bones EBIs that every elementary school should use. All right. So again, love this conversation. I'll encourage you to check out intensiveintervention.org for a whole series of ratings on interventions. But my big ones I go to for phonemic awareness is Road to the Code. For older kids, I'll use something called Phonological Awareness Assessment and Interventions. It's a just phonological awareness package program, but it's designed for a little older kids, which is great. For decoding, I use Sound Partners for younger kids and Rewards, or the other phonics approaches by Anita Archer for the older kids. For fluency, I use repeated reading, but if you want to program, Read Naturally or 6-Minute Solution. And then comprehension, I already mentioned reciprocal teaching, which is a fine approach. There's other websites too, other resources too. So you go to Florida Center for Reading Research, fcrr.org. They have a whole series of intervention materials and so on for the Big Five that are really, really great as well. So there's other resources as well. And go to intensiveintervention.org to see what rates well. But if I have $200 to spend and I'm trying to build an MTSS system, I'm buying those. I'm buying Road to the Code, Sound Partners, Rewards, Read Naturally, and Reciprocal Teaching. I could probably get all those for $200. I don't know it to be true, but I think it probably is. What progress monitoring measure do you recommend for students receiving Tier 3 interventions? Okay. I love this question. It's anonymous. Shoot. Tier 3 interventions in decoding basic reading, scale specific or general outcome. Is ORF okay? You have to measure both. This isn't the topic of the conversation, I'm sorry, but yeah, you have to measure both. Here's why. I have time for this quick story. I was working with a school many years ago, and it was a K2 building, and I would go sit down with the teachers and look at their data and see how it's going, all that. And it was great. I loved it. It would problem solve kids who were struggling. The special ed teacher found out we were doing this, and she came to us and said, hey, can I be part of this meeting? And the principal and I both went, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course, you should have been. We're sorry you weren't. Special ed teacher comes to the first meeting and pulls out all of her data. And she's working with mostly 2nd graders because at the time, using the discrepancy model, it was almost impossible for a child to be identified with a learning disability in schools before 2nd grade, which is really tragic. But anyway, 2nd grade, these are mostly 2nd graders. And she had graphed all their kids using oral reading fluency, using Ames Web. And she pulls them out, and the graphs were all pretty flatline. And she says to me, okay, I'm doing a decoding intervention. Oh, by the way, Dr. Burns, it's the decoding intervention you recommended, and they're not doing well. What do I do? So let's think about this for a second. They're doing a decoding intervention. You're doing that, which is probably fine. These are second graders, probably good. And monitoring progress of reading fluency. Just for the heck of it, try monitoring progress decoding and see what happens. So she started using nonsense word fluency, and sure enough, the kids look great. Oral reading fluency is a wonderful general outcome measure. So I use it. You got to use it. I use that for decisions on resource allocation. Is the kid making good progress? They need to move to from tier 2 to tier 3, from tier 2 to tier 3 to special ed, those types of decisions. Or is the kid done with the intervention? But I also monitor progress in the skill in which we're doing the intervention. Because sometimes it takes a while for that to generalize to this oral reading fluency measure. Ethan Van Norman, Katie Mackey, and myself did a study a few years ago. We looked at does that matter? And with kids at the really early skills, yes, it does. So I use nonsense word fluency if I'm doing a decoding intervention. I'll use, that's the main one. Let's just focus on that. So if I'm monitoring progress for a kid with decoding, I'm going to do grade level Ames Web, grade level Cadence, grade level FastBridge, or reading fluency, CBMR, plus every other week or both each week, I'm going to do like a nonsense word fluency measure as well. Oh, good question. Cheryl asked, I was taught to screen at grade level and progress monitor at instructional level. FastBridge, PM, progress monitor at grade level. Can you explain that? Yes. The reason you monitor progress at the instructional level is it's more sensitive. You'll see more growth. But if you're going to use the data to make a decision, like an RTI decision, like tier 1 to tier 2, tier 2 to tier 3, tier 3 to special ed, or backwards, tier 3 to tier 2, then it has to be highly standardized, psychometrically rigorous, etc. So when that's the case, you need standards and standardization. So using grade level gets both of those. If I'm progress monitoring a fifth grader on a second grade level, well, what's my standard? What's my criterion? I don't know. That's why I have to use fifth grade for those types of decisions. If you're a teacher working with a kid informally, if your kid's already in special ed, monitoring progress towards IEP goals, instructional level is totally fine. But if it's an RTI decision, it's got to be grade level for its standardization and standards. Yes, thank you so much for pointing out Cadence reading is also free. K6 is also free. CBE, someone asked about, what do you think about CBE? I assume that means curriculum-based evaluation. It's Ken Howell's model. It's wonderful. It's super complex. I like to scare my students first day of class by showing them his graph, his model, his figure, and everyone freaks out. I say, don't worry, we're not going to do that to that level. It's never really been studied. That's the issue I have with it. Curriculum-based assessment's been studied, 4 or 5 times, the effects thereof. No one's ever really studied CBE. So until I see that study, I'm not going to be hypocritical. I'm not going to tell you, don't do LLI, but do CBE if there's no research on CBE. I need to see those data first as well. IMS, Cheryl, International MTSS, IMS. I think you're right, Cheryl. I think she said, look, Google it and found International MTSS equals IMS. I think that's correct. Thank you. Is there research on the science of math? Yes, I do know the answer to that question. I'm part of a group that is developing the science of math. So our reading is my primary area. I do like quite a bit of work in math because my area is learning disabilities. So when I say quite a bit, I mean, I've done a few studies. I rely heavily on my colleagues who do work in math. And there's a whole group of us. Sarah Powell out of the University of Texas is spearheading it. We have a website. There's a website, Google Science of Math, and a Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and search for that. And there's great information there as well. So yes, there's research in that area. There's 2 great resources. If you can't find it, email me, I'll help you. Where can I find expected ranges for getting grade levels? The norms. Acadians has free norms. Dibbles has free norms. Ames Web has free norms. Just Google it, and you should be able to find them. If not, let me know. So I mentioned MAP is great for upper elementary. Found that my lower elementary grade students end up getting really high scores in literacy on the assessment when all actually the students can't read very well at all. This happens many times with many different students at different elementary schools. You think MAP is good for lower elementary? So I don't love those types of screeners for early elementary kids. I do a lot of work with Renaissance Learning. I'm sorry, that's a different measure. With NWA, they're great. Their stuff is good. They're good psychometricians, wonderful. But I think the types of skills you can measure in a group administered test don't capture the deficits with early literacy quite as well as I want them to. So if if I'm going to screen, I'm going to use, phonemic awareness, nonsense word fluency, early elementary. Second grade, I'll start looking at reading fluency and use oral reading fluency, second through like fifth grade, and then map. Map, I would probably not use or star before, say, third grade. Now, star early literacy is different. Map has some measures out that are good, but the traditional we think of as map and star, I'd rather use different measures for younger kids. Okay. Oh, is that all of them? Awesome, cool. That was fun. Cool.
All right. Wow, that was excellent, Dr. Burns. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful wealth of information that just was. Rapid fire, gem after gem. Thank you so much. I know people are going to be stopping and rewinding and thinking, wow, what did he say? I need to listen to that three more times, and they should. So yes, we're getting down here. It's 5:30. So thank you again so much for taking the time out of I'm sure your very busy schedule and talking to us here. And so you want to one more time I think someone may have asked for your Twitter handle, and then we'll sign off.
Great. So my email address is burnsmk@missouri.edu, burnsmk@missouri.edu, and my Twitter handle is burnsmk1 @burnsmk1.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Burns.
Thank you.
Stop recording here. Thank you. And everyone have a good night.